At first glance, this might appear quite innocuous and a rather bland piece of metal. Actually, it tells a really fascinating story about the First World War, both in terms of combat in the air, but also the preparations which needed to happen on the ground to make that happen. And so there's a number of features you can see. The holes in the center are really key to the story of this object, but most important of all are these two gaps here, one of which is blanked off. I'm going to talk about those in a moment. The purpose of this unit is to allow people on the ground who are training to serve the Royal Flying Corps and later the Royal Air Force to understand the principle of machine gun synchronisation. Machine gun synchronisation was a really crucial part of air combat in the First World War. Before it arrived, light machine guns were mounted on the wings of aircraft. They were firing forward, or you had to have a separate air gunner firing backwards if you wanted to go and shoot down enemy aircraft. But it was quickly realised that having heavier machine guns mounted to the fuselage for stability and firing forward gave you a much better chance of shooting down the enemy. But that meant you needed to fire through the propeller. And that's a real problem because propellers move very quickly, faster than machine guns fire. And you would then shoot down your own aircraft. You'd blow your propeller off. Bad move. And so at first they decided to armour propellers. Heavy metal attached to the wooden propeller deflects bullets away. Actually more successful than you might think, but you're losing a large number of bullets every time you fire the gun. And quickly a machine gun synchronisation gear is introduced. The Germans first introduced the concept, and it leads in the summer of 1915 to the Fokker Scourge, and RFC aircraft are shot down in heavy numbers. The British respond in kind, and by the summer of 1916, lots of machine gun synchronisation units are in service. But you have to maintain those, because otherwise they go out of sync and you start firing into your own propeller again. And that takes a large maintenance crew on the ground. And the entire story of the First World War is about the mass which maintains that small spear tip which actually does the fighting. And for the RAF, that's even more true. Particularly when it comes to air fighting, you have a small number of pilots who go out and do the flying, but a very large service and logistic corps which maintains them in the air. And so this is absolutely essential. They would have been mounted on a small motorbike engine which would have spun them at very high speed with a machine gun directly behind them. And you'd have brought ground crew up to understand the principle of synchronisation. And you can see a very large plate, machine gun would have been firing at this level, and these gaps are the periods where the machine gun can safely fire through. So you would have bullets firing through these holes, then stopping as the cam engaged, and stopped the machine gun being able to fire until it reached this next point. And then again, this blank, which is wooden, would have been blown away, and you could see very clearly the effect of machine gun fire when it was synced up. And this plate's brilliant as well because you can see what happens when it comes slightly out of sync. It's fired into the metal and slightly broken it away. So a really important piece of the RAF story because it tells you a lot about the fighting in the air, so important, the stories which we hear about the pilots taking the fight to the enemy. But more importantly, it tells you about those hidden masses behind the more glamorous pilots who are doing the really core job of maintaining the RAF in the air. And I love it for that reason. It's also got a really unique story within our own collection because for perhaps 40 years, this had been left unaccessioned in a spares collection because it was quite an odd unit. Somebody had clearly recognised it at one point and had saved it, but then it hadn't been acted upon. And it was only when we came to move from Stafford that it was identified again for what it was, part of machine gun synchronisation gear, and then further research led us to understand exactly how it would have been used, and that it wasn't just a single simple story about air fighting, but actually a much broader part of the wider story of the RAF and the ground crew who fought in the war.
Our fundraising appeal, the Crate Escape, will help us to relocate thousands of objects to the new collections hub, bringing you closer than ever to inspiring RAF stories. You can play a crucial role by sponsoring a box today. Visit rafmuseum.org to support us on this incredible mission.